All right, so I think I got my levels adjusted here. I noticed yesterday that the sound. I went back and listened to the sound quality, and I wasn't getting the input levels. So hopefully this is coming through loud and clear. I'm actually going to turn it up. There we go. The mic is much better now. Okay, so here we are. I'm at the penultimate meditation from chapter that became chapter 4 in Being and Learning. So there's today and then tomorrow, and then chapter 4 called Plato's Allegory of the Cave is over. So yesterday's meditation, well, my commentary went well beyond talking about what I wrote, because I was talking about the sort of transformation, emancipation that I've been going through that coincided with the commemoration of this material. That is to say, because I was sort of propelled by the Latin American Philosophy Education Societies, which formed a year ago, April 20. Well, formally it was inaugurated in April of 2013, and then they had their first conference in the fall of November, I believe it was. The first weekend of November in 2013 at Teachers College, and then subsequently they did their first ever participation at the Philosophy of Education Society, a reading laboratory. And so the work I've been doing with them over the past year, supporting their work, being involved in somewhat in their work, has slowly but surely sort of nudged me into a very interesting place. So I talked about that yesterday in my meditation, and how I feel as if I'm sort of, as I've been reading this material on the allegory and talk of being put underway towards learning, that I myself am sort of going through this experience as I am doing more and more work on the phenomenology of the originary thinking, now deployed within the context of the question concerning Latin American philosophy education. So let me pick it up. Today, the 18th of April, the writing that I did 10 years ago, that would be the second to last meditation of what would become chapter 4 in Being and Learning. We have tried to make connections between learning and freedom, and have made some headway with the allegory. The story, as we have been retelling it, indicates how education, schooling, preserves and prepares the way for learning. This preservation and preparation conserves natality, or the capacity to participate in the activity of freedom. In turn, the story unfolds and is moved by the important turnings or transitions, which are meant to depict the process of releasement that culminates in the liberated one's desire for his companions and his decision to return to the cave. But as we recall and will revisit, the motivation for his return comes from the play between his longing and, as Socrates tells us, his being compelled to return. The play between the give and take, between offering and receiving, turns out to be the way freedom appears in learning. And this is another way of saying that the twofold play is present throughout the story. That is, present in each and every stage of education and then learning. Put differently, this way of hearing the story allows us to underline the role of the other, the relationality, in learning, which now stands for the entirety of the process that includes schooling and learning. If, as we have said above, freedom is the essence of learning, this assertion is meaningful to the extent that we understand learning as a relational event, as a reciprocal exchange. Here, within the context of the allegory, we see how the relational event is present yet evolving within the liberation process itself. And this helps us to understand how the liberated one's relation to the captor shifts from an asymmetrical educational relationship, where the captor is fully present and active guide, to a symmetric relationship, where the captor stands side by side as a silent partner in the reciprocal exchange that calls out to others to form a community of learning, a fellowship of purposeful wanderers, pilgrims of learning. If the relational event is present from the beginning of the story, then, as we have suggested, so too is freedom. Freedom, however, does not appear as actualized or manifest until the third part of the story. The truth of concealment is to conserve freedom, to hide it from the world, and thereby protect it from the world and the world from it, until, that is, the appearance of the adult who is capable of understanding freedom as a relational event, not the movement of the self-certain subject bearing down on the world. To be free is to be free with the world, to be with others, to be released into the company of the reciprocal exchange. In the first parts of the story, in schooling, freedom remains sheltered, secured within the security of the domestic habitat. In parts 1 and 2, we see the originary link between dwelling, freedom, and the construction of the edifice or artifice. The cave is the edifice as artifice, schooling as the theater of concealment. Quote, edifice, a building, especially one of some size and pretension. Pretension, assumption of a claim. True or false, a pretense, a deception. Artifice, anything contrived by art, human skill, cunning, trickery, a contrivance, a trick, unquote. Artifice, quote, the production of making something, especially in arts or crafts, unquote, with the archaic meaning of artistic style or skill, unquote. Parts 1 and 2 of the story recover the original event of freedom as conservation, as sheltering. Schooling as the edifice or of artifice is the abode of hiding, the home of the truth of concealment, where we are taught to recognize our being in the world with others as our proper comportment. In schooling, we acquire the understanding of the meaning of dwelling. Quote, we do not dwell because we have built, but we build and have built because we dwell. That is, because we are dwellers. But in what does the essence of dwelling consist? Let us listen once more to what language says to us. The Old Saxon wuon, the Gothic Wunian, like the word bauen, means to remain, to stay in place. But the Gothic Wunian says more distinctly how this remaining is experienced. Wunian means to be at peace, to be brought to peace, to remain in peace. The word for peace, Friede, means the free, das frei. And frei means preserved from harm and danger, preserved from something, safeguarded. To free actually means to spare. The sparing itself consists not only in the fact that we do not harm the one who we spare. Real sparing is something positive and takes place when we leave something beforehand in its own essence. The fundamental character of dwelling is this sparing. Unquote from Heidegger. The link between building, dwelling, and freedom appears in the allegory, first, as the safeguarding or sheltering of natality, and second, as the releasement of this capacity to participate in the event of freedom. Thus, to understand how freedom is present throughout the allegory, one must think through the relationship between artifice and edifice, the link between schooling as the abiding place of freedom, the shelter of natality. This sheltering culminates when the captive is released, is spared, in part 2 of the story. So that was a fun meditation because, in particular, I came back to some part of the method of the phenomenology that I'd gotten away from, in part because I was focusing so much on Plato's allegory and the text therein. But something that I did throughout the writing, which gave me a lot of pleasure, a lot of joy in the writing, was to trace back concepts, to their roots in the words. And so what I was trying to suggest here was, again, to look at schooling as a kind of dwelling, a dwelling place for freedom, and then to talk about the truth of concealment as the force of the way in which freedom dwells, right? So if the truth of concealment is a kind of force, and I'm talking about the force as a kind of power, so it has a power, it's the power of concealment is the power of dwelling. And the power of dwelling is the power of holding back and allowing for freedom to develop, holding it back. And so what I try to do is to make the relationship between concealment and dwelling, and then taking these the actual sort of framework of the cave, and to talk about it as an edifice and an artifice. And that's why I say the cave is the edifice as artifice, schooling as the theater of concealment. So now I've sort of redeemed the whole thing. So it's not, going from the beginning of the first reading of the allegory as saying, well, it's necessarily and inherently depicting a situation of oppression, right? And it's impossible to think of it otherwise. And then going through each of the stages of the allegory, and then coming back and saying, well, let's look at it again. And then as I'm concluding the reading of the allegory, saying, actually, if you think about it in terms of the cave as part of a process that leads to learning, that's how the whole thing turned on the question concerning preparation, then we can rethink the cave as schooling, and we can think of schooling as the necessary artifice that is preserving freedom. So it's the dwelling as the place of, as Heidegger puts it, sparing freedom, letting it be. But letting it be not in the sense of it being actualized, but letting it be in the way that Arendt talks about it, as being sort of developed slowly and cultivated, cared for and cultivated. So what's schooling then in the end, and what the allegory, with the cave, particularly the part where we talk about the cave dwellers, the dwelling within the cave, what that represents then is the cultivation and the caring for freedom, and that just sounds, on the face of it, that just sounds outrageous and ridiculous, right? And it opens, and it's provocative, and in a certain sense, that's the whole point. Is that I'm trying to, and making these claims to provoke thinking. So it's in a way, it's a ruse to say these things. If in the end what happens is it provokes thinking. But on the face of it, the claim which I'm making most sincerely, even if it is provocative, is it sounds crazy, right? How can you say that that the period, that there is such a thing, that there's this necessity for being held back? Now, I want to make it very clear, particularly because I just got off the phone, I just had a Skype meeting with a graduate student who's very interested in democratic education and has very strong interest in the work of Paulo Freire, and is sort of committed to that. And I want to make it clear what I've already said, which is to say that from an Arendtian point of view, we're not talking about a conservative education as an oppressive form of education, and that's why it's important to rethink and reimagine what's going on in the dwelling of the cave. What then do you make of the chains? Well, of course, if you read it, if there's a literal reading of it and a literal translating of it, then of course it's inherently oppressive. But if you rethink it and reimagine the dwelling of the cave as something like practice, or what I call in one of my writings, what's akin to the conservatory. So if you think of a conservatory in a musical, artistic conservatory, there's a lot of attention to detail. There's a lot of attention to disciplining and becoming disciplined in your craft, to going over, reviewing, and becoming a kind of training, to get training in the techniques that have been refined over hundreds of years, in so many different ways, right? So many different practices. The practice of working with wood or with stones, sculpting, the use of paints, making paints. I mean, all the different ways. And now I'm just thinking in terms of the plastic arts, but in terms of music, just going through and taking up the past. So for me, what I'm reimagining these chains as is just the past. It's simply that. It's simply being held back and relating to what Arendt calls the world that is there before we enter into it and is present before we're born into it. And for Arendt, the most important thing is to cultivate a relationship with this world and a relationship with this past, that we in a certain sense revere the past, right? So we go back into the past and we take up all the work that's been done in the past, in whatever the discipline that we're talking about, and understand that and go through that. In this sense, our freedom is not simply being held back in an oppressive way, but it's being refined and focused. So in the end, when we're going into the world to contribute to it, we have all these resources and all these techniques, and we're able to do something, right, that is truly contributing to the world. In this sense. So that's the reimagining of the school as this dwelling where freedom, in the sense of becoming actualized, is spared. Spared meaning that it is allowed to be in a preparatory way. And it's only after we've gone to school that we're prepared and ready to then engage in what I call learning. And then learning is this, larger phenomena for the contributions that we make with others to the renewal and repair of the world. And in some sense, it sounds odd to call that learning, but because of the ontological approach that I'm taking, it has to be called learning, because we're never done. The work is never complete, and this is this is the sense of the existential and historicist approach I'm taking, which is that the human being is always in the process of becoming, right? And so our freedom is something that's never fully actualized in the sense that it is done with or complete. So learning then stands for that ongoing work that we do insofar as we are contributing to the repair and renewal of the world. And schooling is the preparation for that. And that's it. So I have one more meditation tomorrow's, and then the allegory of the cave, chapter 4, is complete.